Hollywood creates stars, but legends are carved from something deeper. Robert Redford wasn't just the golden boy of cinema. He was the man every actor wanted to be, and every woman couldn't forget. But behind the cool smile, behind the charm of the Sundance Kid, was a man quietly haunted by love. Loves that lifted him, loves that broke him, and loves he never stopped carrying. At 89 years old, Redford finally revealed the 6 women who shaped his heart. From the first wife who believed in him before the world knew his name, to the Hollywood goddess who slipped away too soon, to the passion that nearly consumed him, and finally, the woman who brought him peace. These weren't tabloid affairs. They were the hidden truths of a man the world thought it knew. For decades, the cameras showed us his triumphs, but they never captured his heartbreak. What you're about to discover is the side of Robert Redford that only a few ever truly knew. Stay with us because Robert Redford's greatest love stories were never filmed, and once you hear them, you'll never see him the same way again. Before the awards, before the magazine covers, before Hollywood even knew his name, there was Lola Van Wagenen. She wasn't an actress, she wasn't chasing the spotlight. She was a historian, a woman of quiet intelligence, someone who lived far outside the chaos of fame. And that's exactly what Redford needed in those early years. Someone real, someone steady, someone who saw him not as a legend, but simply as Bob. They married in 1958, long before Redford became a household name. Together, they raised 4 children, building a life that looked almost ordinary, even as the extraordinary was waiting just around the corner. While the world was ready to put him on a pedestal, Lola was the anchor keeping his feet on the ground. She knew him when he had nothing, when the dream was still just a fragile hope. And that kind of love leaves a mark no fame can erase. But Hollywood doesn't forgive distance. As his career exploded, the long nights, constant travel, and crushing weight of fame began pulling them apart. After nearly 3 decades together, they quietly divorced in 1985. No scandals, no screaming headlines, just 2 people who realized they had grown in different directions. Fame had given him everything he thought he wanted, but in the process, it took the one person who had believed in him first. And yet, Lola never really left his heart. Even in later interviews, Redford spoke of her with a kind of quiet respect, sometimes with a hint of sadness, as if part of him always remained tied to the woman who believed in him before the world ever did. She wasn't just his first wife, she was the foundation he built his entire life on. And even when an anchor is released, it still leaves its mark on the soul. For Redford, Lola was the love that showed him what devotion looked like. And though their paths separated, she became the measuring stick for every love that came after. But if Lola grounded him, the next woman would set his world on fire in a way he never saw coming. The 1960s were a golden age in Hollywood, and at the center of it all stood Natalie Wood. She had grown up on screen, transforming from a child actress into one of the most magnetic leading ladies of her era. To audiences, she was flawless, luminous, graceful, almost untouchable. But to Robert Redford, still carving out his place among the giants, she was something else entirely. Their paths crossed on the set of Inside Daisy Clover in 1965, and later in This Property is Condemned in 1966. On screen, their chemistry was undeniable. Redford as the charming drifter, Natalie as the vulnerable dreamer. Together, they captured the restless spirit of a generation. Audiences felt it, critics praised it, and behind the cameras, whispers began to spread that maybe, just maybe, the connection didn't stop when the director yelled, "Cut!" For Natalie, who had spent her life under the microscope of fame, Redford was different. He was private, thoughtful, unwilling to be swallowed whole by the industry. For Redford, Natalie was both luminous and fragile, a woman whose beauty masked storms that few understood. Their bond, whether it was a fleeting romance or a deep friendship, left an imprint that neither could deny. And then came tragedy. In 1981, Natalie Wood's sudden and mysterious death shook Hollywood to its core. For Redford, it was a haunting reminder of how fragile even the brightest stars could be. He rarely spoke about her publicly, but on the rare occasions when he did, his words carried a tenderness that spoke louder than any confession. It was as if he was protecting her memory, holding it too close to his heart to let the world pick it apart. Natalie Wood may not have been a lasting love, but she was a spark, fleeting, delicate, unforgettable. The kind of spark that reminds a man that even in the glitter of Hollywood, real connection is rare, and once it slips away, it can never be recreated. But if Natalie was a spark, the next woman was a wildfire, a love story that burned bright, clashed hard, and changed Hollywood forever. If Natalie Wood was a spark, then Barbra Streisand was a wildfire. By the early 1970s, Redford had already made his mark in Hollywood, but nothing could have prepared him for the cultural explosion that came when he starred alongside Streisand in The Way We Were, 1973. The film wasn't just a love story, it was a cultural moment, a portrait of passion, politics, and the cruel passage of time. At its heart stood two characters who seemed to mirror the actors themselves: Katie, the fiercely outspoken dreamer, and Hubble, the golden boy with quiet restraint. On screen, the tension between them was electric. Audiences believed every longing glance, every bitter argument, every kiss that looked less like acting and more like confession. Off-screen, their dynamic was just as complicated. Streisand later admitted she had been captivated by Redford, calling him the golden boy. And who could blame her? Redford embodied calm, composure, and quiet control. But where Streisand burned with intensity, Redford often pulled back into silence. He admired her brilliance, but was overwhelmed by her fire. It was oil and water, volatile, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. Their chemistry turned The Way We Were into one of the most unforgettable romances in movie history, but it was also a mirror of reality. Just as their characters couldn't make love survive against destiny, Streisand and Redford could never bridge the distance between who they were off-screen. To her, he may have been the one who slipped away. To him, she became the love story he could only live in fiction, not in life. Audiences walked away from the film in tears, not just because of the script, but because they sensed the truth. The longing and restraint weren't only acting, they were glimpses of two real people, caught in a connection that could never fully exist. For Redford, it was a romance that belonged to the screen, one preserved in celluloid, but never meant for real life. Yet the fire of it lingered, fueling a legend that fans still talk about to this day. But Hollywood wasn't done testing him, because after the fire came a storm, a love so consuming that for once Redford wasn't the calm center of the story. He was swept right into it. By the late 1980s, Robert Redford had conquered everything Hollywood could offer. He wasn't just a leading man anymore. He was a director, a producer, and a force shaping cinema itself. But it was during this stage of his life that he crossed paths with a woman who would shake the very foundation of his carefully balanced world: Sonia Braga. Known internationally for films like Dona Flor and Her Two Husbands and Kiss of the Spider-Woman, Braga was no ordinary actress. She was fearless, magnetic, and unapologetically intense. Where Redford was measured and private, she lived life unfiltered, bringing with her the raw fire of Latin America. To Redford, who had spent decades guarding himself behind restraint, Sonia was a storm he couldn't resist. Their relationship was passionate, cultural, emotional, and, according to those close to him, at times volatile. She was the flame that burned too hot, the kind of love that demanded everything. For the first time, Redford wasn't the calm center others leaned on. Instead, he was caught in the whirlwind, pulled into a love that was as thrilling as it was destabilizing. It couldn't last. Redford craved stability, roots, and balance. Sonia thrived on passion, unpredictability, and intensity. Their worlds collided in ways that lit sparks but could never truly sustain a lasting bond. And yet, even years later, Redford spoke of her with admiration, describing her as unforgettable, a force of nature who changed him. Sonia Braga wasn't the woman he built a life with. She wasn't the one he married, but she was the love that reminded him of something dangerous. Even the most disciplined men can be undone by passion. And for Redford, she became the flame that would never completely burn out in his memory. But storms eventually fade, and when they do, some men are lucky enough to find calm. And in the 1990s, Redford did just that, meeting the woman who would finally bring him the peace he had been searching for his entire life. By the time Robert Redford met Sybil Sagers, he had lived several lifetimes in one. He had been Hollywood's golden boy, the director reshaping cinema, the activist standing against the machine. He had known the highs of fame, the ache of divorce, and the sting of love lost. And then, just when the world least expected it, he found a love that would last. Sybille wasn't a Hollywood actress. She wasn't chasing fame or flashing lights. She was a German-born painter whose art reflected the colors of nature, the mountains, the forests, the quiet places Redford had always retreated to for balance. Where the fiery women of his past had demanded intensity, Sybille offered something rarer: peace. They met in the 1990s during a chapter when Redford had pulled back from Hollywood's chaos and settled deeper into a sanctuary in Sundance, Utah. In her quiet spirit, he found a reflection of himself. They built a relationship away from the red carpets and the cameras, rooted not in spectacle but in stillness. After more than a decade together, they married in 2009 in a private ceremony in Hamburg, Germany. No flashing bulbs, no magazine spreads, just a promise between two souls who valued the same silence the rest of the world never understood. For Redford, Sybille became more than a partner. She was the calm after decades of storms, the companion who could sit with him in silence and make that silence feel whole. At 89, when Redford looks back on his life, it's clear Sybille is not just a chapter. She is the closing act, the one who stood beside him in the twilight of his years. If passion once consumed him, she offered the stillness that gave his life balance. For a man who had lived through every shade of love, Sybille Sagars was the proof that sometimes the greatest love stories don't roar, they whisper. But even as Redford found peace, there was one woman whose bond lingered in a different way. Not a lover, not a wife, but a connection that hovered just on the edge of romance and lasted for decades. Few Hollywood pairings carried as much natural ease as Robert Redford and Jane Fonda. From the moment they appeared together in Barefoot in the Park, 1967, audiences were convinced they were made for each other. Their playful chemistry felt effortless, the kind that can't be faked. Decades later, when they reunited for The Electric Horseman, 1979, and again for Our Souls at Night, 2017, that magic was still there, seasoned, matured, but every bit as powerful. And yet, behind the laughter and intimacy they shared on screen, Redford and Fonda were never truly lovers. Instead, they embodied something more elusive, a connection that flirted with romance but never crossed the line. Redford admired Jane's courage, her political activism, her relentless pursuit of truth. She was bold, outspoken, unapologetic, everything he respected but often kept at arm's length in his own life. Jane, on the other hand, has spoken openly about her affection for Redford. In interviews, she admitted she sometimes wished they had been more than co-stars. But timing is everything, and theirs was never right. Redford, famously guarded with his private life, wasn't willing to risk the rare trust they had built. Perhaps he feared that a romance would shatter the bond they shared as collaborators and friends. When they reunited late in life for Our Souls at Night, both actors confessed it felt like coming home. On screen, they played two widowed neighbors discovering unexpected love in old age. To audiences, it wasn't just acting. It felt like a glimpse into what might have been all along. A love story that existed only in possibility, never reality. For Redford, Jane Fonda wasn't a lost love, but a reminder of one. Proof that sometimes the most enduring connections aren't defined by romance, but by trust, respect, and an unspoken longing that never fully fades. She was the almost in his life, the door that never opened but was always there in the background. 6 women, 6 different kinds of love. Each one left its imprint on him, shaping not just the man, but the legend the world remembers today. And when audiences look back at Robert Redford's career, they don't just see an actor or a director, they see a man who carried every one of those stories inside him, even when the camera stopped rolling. To the outside world, Robert Redford's life always looked golden, the perfect reel of triumphs, beauty, and success. But behind the legend was a man shaped just as much by heartbreak as by love. From Lola Van Wagenen, the anchor who gave him family, to Natalie Wood, the fragile spark whose memory never faded. From Barbra Streisand, whose fire burned too bright to last, to Sonia Braga, the passion that nearly consumed him. From Sybille Sagars, the peace he had been searching for, to Jane Fonda, the friend who became the love story that never happened. Each woman left her mark. Each one carved a chapter into his story. Together, they formed the hidden map of Redford's heart, A map the cameras never captured, but one that defined the man behind the icon. At 89, when Redford looks back on his journey, it's not just the films or the fame that echo through time. It's the women who shaped his soul and the loves that turned him from a Hollywood heartthrob into a human being we could all see ourselves in. Because in the end, the greatest roles we play are not on screen, but in the lives of the people who leave their fingerprints on our hearts. So now it's your turn. Which of Robert Redford's untold love stories moved you the most? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love uncovering the hidden truths of Hollywood's biggest legends, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next.